Hi, I'm Mia. 2 months ago, I opened the small, dark mahogany drawer where I kept my engagement ring. It was the one my late fiancé Adrian saved for years to design with me. It was gone. The ring, worth nearly $600,000, had always been my most cherished possession, not for its price, but for the countless memories it held. It represented the life Adrian and I had dreamed of building together, a life that never got the chance to fully bloom. I found my mother in the kitchen, casually scrolling through her phone, the smell of fresh coffee hanging in the air. She didn't even look up when she spoke. "Oh, that we sold it." Clara needed time to find herself in Bali. She said it like they'd just cleared out a pile of old clothes, not a priceless piece of my heart. No warning, no remorse, just a legal envelope tossed onto my bed like a half-hearted apology. But what they never saw coming, what they couldn't even begin to anticipate, was what I'd do next. Before we dive deeper, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like the people who should protect you are the very ones who break you? Have you ever been made to feel small, like a footnote in your own life story? If you have, drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching this from and what time it is. I read every one. That Friday morning felt heavier than most. New York's spring was trying to force its way through the lingering chill. Pale sunlight slipped through the blinds, stretching thin across the untouched dresser. I sat on the edge of my bed, brushing the dust off my old college sweatshirt, trying to shake off the weight pressing against my chest. It had been 2 years since Adrian's accident, 2 years since my world folded in on itself. I reached for the second drawer of my nightstand where the velvet box always rested, always. It had become a ritual, my way of holding on to something real, something certain. My fingers felt for the familiar cool metal latch, but this time the drawer slid open too easily, too lightly. No box. I blinked, heart thudding. I pulled the drawer out further, checking the back, flipping over a few old receipts. A dried-out pen and a small chipped music box Adrian had bought me on our first trip to Paris. But there was no velvet box, not even the thin, folded cloth that once held it. Panic set in sharp and cold. I stumbled out of bed, my socked feet slipping on the hardwood as I rushed down the stairs. My mother was still in the kitchen, her back to me, flipping through a magazine. She didn't even bother to glance my way as I stepped into the room, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter like it might steady the world spinning around me. "Mom," I said, my voice tight, forced, calm, barely holding back a wave of something darker. "Do you know where my ring is?" She looked up finally, her eyes briefly meeting mine before flicking back to her mug. She took a slow sip like I'd just asked her about the weather. "Oh, that we sold it. Clara needed the funds for her Bali retreat. Spiritual stuff, you know, you weren't wearing it anymore anyway." The words hit me like a slap. I felt the blood drain from my face. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. My chest tightened, not with panic, but with a deep, biting betrayal. "You sold it?" My voice wavered, breaking slightly. "You sold Adrian's ring." She had the audacity to sigh, setting her cup down with a soft clink. "Mia, it's not like you were still engaged. Adrian is gone. You need to move on." I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat, my mind stumbling over the jagged edge of grief and disbelief. My father's voice drifted from the living room, the lazy, detached tone that had always been his hallmark. "You haven't touched it in months, Mia. We figured it was just collecting dust." I turned, finding him leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, a hint of irritation tightening his jaw. Like my grief was a burden he'd grown tired of carrying. "That ring wasn't just a piece of metal," I whispered, my voice gaining strength as my fingers dug into the cool marble of the counter. "Adrian designed it with me. We chose the diamond together. It's engraved. It's part of him." Mom rolled her eyes, reaching for the sugar bowl. "Clara needed the money more. She's finding herself. This retreat is life-changing for her." I stepped back, feeling the room tilt slightly. My head buzzed, my vision tunneling around the edges. They hadn't just sold a ring. They had sold the last piece of him. I had left the last piece of us. I turned and walked back up the stairs, each step heavier than the last, my mother's casual dismissal echoing in my mind. When I reached my room, I opened the drawer again. Same empty space, but this time I noticed something tucked in the corner, barely visible against the dark wood. It was the velvet cloth, deep blue, with small white daisy patterns stitched along the edge. Limp, weightless, abandoned. I sat on the floor, the cloth draped across my lap, my fingers tracing the delicate stitches. Adrian had once said the daisies reminded him of the field we stumbled upon during a road trip to Vermont, the one where we had danced barefoot in the summer sun, laughing like children without a care in the world. I sat there for a long time, letting the cold, bitter truth settle around me. They hadn't just sold a ring. They'd sold my memories, my promises, my future. And they had no idea what that would cost them. The days that followed felt surreal, like I was living in the shadow of my own life. I moved through the house like a ghost, my steps soft, my voice quieter than usual. My parents, meanwhile, carried on as if nothing had happened, their lives untouched by the storm they had unleashed in mine. By Sunday, I still hadn't left my room. The velvet cloth lay on my nightstand, a silent, bitter reminder of what had been taken from me. I hadn't turned on my phone, avoiding the world, terrified of what else might be stolen if I let myself be seen, heard, felt. But when I finally did, I wished I hadn't. The first thing I saw was Clara's newest Instagram post. She was perched on a wooden yoga deck, the lush greens of Bali stretching endlessly behind her. She wore a white, flowy dress, her arms raised to the sky like a saint in a Renaissance painting. The caption read, "Healing is expensive, but so worth it. Eternally grateful to my family for believing in my journey." My thumb froze over the screen. I felt the air squeeze out of my lungs. My stomach twisted painfully, a knot of anger and disbelief tightening with each heartbeat. I scrolled through the comments. "You're glowing. Such a beautiful soul, an inspiration to us all." Each line felt like a fresh wound, a deliberate twist of the knife. I clicked on her story. Clara was laughing, her hair catching the light, a fresh flower crown resting gently atop her perfectly styled curls. She sipped a bright layered smoothie and spoke to the camera, her voice light and airy. Sometimes you have to let go of old things to truly find yourself. "I'm so thankful for my amazing family for making this possible. I feel so free." My jaw clenched. Free. She felt free, standing in the sun, far away from the wreckage she left behind. She had used the ring money, Adrian's ring money, to fund this picture-perfect retreat, to find herself, to broadcast her rebirth to the world. I felt something crack inside me, a cold, calculated anger I hadn't known I could feel. Clara's freedom had been paid for with my pain, and she was flaunting it for the world to see. I dropped my phone onto my bed, my fingers trembling, my pulse roaring in my ears. I could barely see through the red haze clouding my vision. They thought they could strip me of my memories, sell my grief for a trip to Bali, and I would just... What? Disappear into my silence. No. I reached for the velvet cloth, feeling the soft, familiar fabric slip between my fingers. I carefully unfolded it, smoothing out the wrinkles, my mind already sharpening like a blade. They thought I was weak, that I would sit and mourn forever, that my grief made me powerless. They had no idea who I was. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a surge of purpose. I would not vanish quietly into their narrative. If they wanted to rewrite my story, I'd make sure I had the final word. I started small, careful not to let the rage cloud my judgment. Clara had always been reckless, but I had the advantage of patience. I wasn't looking for quick satisfaction. I wanted something lasting, something that cut deep without me ever having to raise my voice. First, I pulled up my laptop, my fingers moving steadily over the keys despite the tightness in my chest. I found the saved folder labeled Memories. Inside, photos of Adrian and me. Our trips to the coast, late-night diner selfies, grainy shots from our favorite hiking trails. And then the ring photos. I hovered over them for a moment, the image of the ring catching the light, its intricate design reflecting our shared dreams. I clicked open the appraisal documents, the digital copies of the certificates Adrian had insisted on keeping. Each one listed my name as the rightful owner. Then I found the email thread. Adrian had spent months coordinating with the jeweler, agonizing over the smallest details. The band's twist symbolized our lives intertwining, the center diamond representing our future. He had sent me snippets of their conversations, excitedly sharing every stage of the design. I sat back, exhaling slowly. They hadn't just sold a ring. They had stolen something irreplaceable. And they had done it without so much as a second thought. My hands moved on their own, selecting files, copying documents, creating a fresh folder titled Evidence. I included everything: purchase receipts, insurance, appraisals, the emails. Then I started a spreadsheet laying out each transaction, each message, each piece of paper that proved the ring had been mine, that it had never been theirs to sell. Once the folder was complete, I saved it to a flash drive, slipping it into the velvet cloth. My fingers lingered on the soft fabric, the tiny embroidered daisies, now a symbol of quiet defiance. I tucked it safely into the bottom drawer of my desk, the one I had cleared out just for this purpose. But I wasn't done. Next, I opened my social media. I hadn't posted in over a year, my profile a quiet, forgotten corner of the internet. But now I had a reason. I crafted a simple post, a black and white photo of the velvet cloth, the embroidered daisies in soft focus with a single line beneath it. Some things are priceless even when others try to sell them for spare change. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't mention names. But I knew my family and their circle would see it. I wanted them to feel the unease, the slow, creeping realization that I wasn't as broken as they believed. Within hours, the post started gathering likes, old friends reaching out with quiet support, a few distant cousins leaving cryptic heart emojis. I ignored them all, my eyes fixed on the growing number of views. That night, as I lay in bed, I pulled the velvet cloth from my drawer once more, letting the soft, worn fabric rest against my cheek. I whispered into the darkness, promising Adrian that this fight wasn't over, that his memory would not be erased for someone else's moment of self-discovery. And as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I could almost hear his voice, warm and steady, whispering back from the depths of my mind, "Make them remember." By the following week, I had fully embraced my quiet defiance. I began each morning with a purpose, my steps lighter, my resolve sharper. I could feel the shift, the gradual awakening of something fierce within me. It started with a trip to the bank. I waited in line, the faint scent of polished leather and printer ink filling the air. When I reached the teller, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a tired smile, I handed over my ID and leaned in slightly. "I need copies of my recent statements," I said, my voice firm. "And I'd like to update the contact details on my accounts." She nodded, typing quickly before looking up. "Just the mailing address or also the emergency contacts?" I hesitated for only a second. "Everything. Remove my parents. I'd like my accounts to be entirely in my name." She paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. For a moment, I saw the flicker of curiosity in her eyes, the quiet recognition of someone making a clean break. I offered her a small, tight-lipped smile. "Of course, ma'am. I'll handle that right away." I left the bank with a weight lifted from my shoulders, my accounts finally untangled from the grasp of people who had long stopped seeing me as a daughter and more as an extension of their ambitions. Next, I called Adrian's parents. We hadn't spoken much since his passing, the grief too raw, the memories too sharp. But I knew this conversation was long overdue. Adrian's mother, Lisa, answered on the third ring, her voice soft but tinged with the exhaustion of someone who had loved and lost too deeply. "Mia," she said, surprise threading through her words. "It's been a while, dear." I took a deep breath, letting the sound of her voice ground me. "Yes, I know, I should have called sooner. Things have been hard." A small, understanding pause. "I know, sweetheart. They've been hard for all of us." We spoke for nearly an hour, our words weaving through memories of Adrian, the life we had planned, the silent, aching spaces he had left behind. I hesitated as the call wound down, my hand tightening around the phone. "I have something to tell you," I finally said, my voice steady despite the tightness in my throat. "It's about the ring." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. I could almost see Lisa's eyes narrowing, her mind piecing together the fragments of my hesitation. "Tell me," she said, her voice suddenly sharper, a protective edge I hadn't heard in years. I told her everything. The drawer, the empty velvet cloth, my mother's dismissive tone, Clara's retreat. I heard the soft rustle of fabric as Lisa leaned forward, perhaps gripping the edge of her chair, her breath coming in short, quiet bursts. "They had no right," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "That ring was yours. Adrian made sure of it." "I know," I said, my voice trembling. "But they took it anyway, and I can't let them get away with it." There was a long silence, the kind that stretches thin over years of shared grief, until finally she spoke, her voice a low, simmering flame. "Whatever you need, Mia, you have our full support. That ring was a part of him. They can't just erase that." I felt my eyes sting, a wave of gratitude washing over me. "Thank you," I whispered. "I won't let them take his memory, I promise." After the call, I felt the quiet resolve of someone who had finally found her footing. I dug deeper into my preparations, printing out receipts, cataloging emails, even snapping photos of the empty velvet cloth and the daisy-embroidered corner that had once cradled my future. I even reached out to a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Eva, who had built her career on cases of stolen inheritance and family betrayal. I met her in a small, glass-walled office overlooking the bustling streets of Midtown. She listened quietly as I laid out my case, her eyes narrowing at the mention of my parents' casual theft, her pen scratching quickly over a yellow notepad. When I finished, she leaned back, folding her hands over her knee. "This isn't just a simple theft, Mia," she said, her eyes flashing. "This is emotional and financial abuse, and we have a very strong case." I exhaled, the tension slowly unwinding from my shoulders. "Then let's do it," I said, my voice steady, my heart thudding in my chest. "Let's make them remember." As I left her office, the city felt a little less overwhelming, the air a little lighter. I had taken the first steps toward reclaiming my voice, my worth, my memories. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally moving forward. The following week, I felt a strange, simmering energy beneath my skin, like a current building just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time, something close to power. I took the day off work, spending my morning at a small family-owned cafe where the barista remembered my order without asking. The rich, bitter taste of espresso grounded me as I opened my laptop, pulling up the growing folder of evidence I had been meticulously collecting. The flash drive wrapped in the velvet cloth sat beside my cup, a quiet, heavy presence, like a loaded gun on a table. I sipped my coffee, my fingers moving steadily over the keys as I drafted an email to Eva. I attached the photos, the scanned receipts, the email chains between Adrian and the jeweler, even the blurry screenshots of Clara's Bali posts. Subject: final submission for case review. Body: Eva. Please find attached the remaining documents. Let me know if you need anything else before we proceed. I want to move forward as soon as possible. Thank you for being in my corner. Mia. I hit send, my heart thudding in my chest. It felt final, like closing a door, locking it, and throwing the key into the ocean. The barista passed by my table, refilling my cup with a quick, practiced motion. He glanced at the pile of papers beside my laptop, his brow furrowing slightly. "Big project?" he asked, his voice low, trying not to intrude. I forced a small smile, nodding. "You could say that." He offered a sympathetic nod, retreating behind the counter. I watched him go, suddenly aware of the soft, steady hum of the espresso machine, the quiet clinking of cups, the muted chatter of other patrons. It felt good to be among strangers, to be invisible for a moment, a shadow in the background of someone else's day. When I left the cafe, the sun had climbed higher, the harsh winter wind losing its bite as spring slowly pushed its way into the city. I let the cold air whip at my face as I made my way to the small, nondescript building where Eva's office was tucked between a dental clinic and a vintage bookstore. Eva greeted me with a firm handshake, her eyes sharp and focused. She led me to a small conference room where the walls were lined with tall steel shelves crammed with case files, the quiet metallic scent of paper and ink hanging in the air. "Take a seat," she said, gesturing to the polished wooden table in the center of the room. She flipped open a sleek, leather-bound notebook, her pen poised. I reviewed the documents you sent. She began leaning forward slightly, her eyes locking onto mine. You have a strong case. The ring was clearly a gift intended solely for you, and the evidence you've gathered makes that unmistakably clear. I felt a rush of relief, the tightness in my chest loosening for the first time in weeks. Good, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. I want to proceed. Ava smiled, a thin, sharp line that hinted at the shark beneath her professional exterior. Then let's get started. She laid out the plan, walking me through the steps we'd take to recover the ring's value, possibly even press charges for emotional damages. She talked about court dates, depositions, and financial audits, her words coming fast and precise, each one a small, calculated strike. As she spoke, I felt something in me harden, a quiet, determined resolve taking root. This wasn't just about the ring anymore. It was about reclaiming my voice, my worth, my story. When the meeting ended, I felt lighter, more grounded, like I had finally found my footing. I stepped out into the brisk afternoon, my breath coming in short, sharp puffs of steam as I made my way back to my car. I had one more stop to make. I drove to my parents' house, the familiar brick facade looming like a ghost from my past. I parked across the street, my fingers gripping the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, I considered turning back, driving away, letting the legal system handle the mess. But then I thought of the velvet cloth, the tiny hand-stitched daisies, the memories that had been so casually discarded. No, they needed to hear this from me. I crossed the street, my boots crunching softly against the cracked pavement, the winter wind cutting through my jacket. I didn't knock. I still had my old key, the brass worn and familiar, and I let myself in the door, creaking softly as it swung open. The house felt smaller than I remembered, the walls closing and the familiar scent of lavender and lemon cleaner clinging to the air. I found my mother in the kitchen, flipping through a home decor magazine, her coffee steaming gently beside her. She looked up as I entered, her eyes widening slightly before settling back into their usual dismissive coolness. "Oh, Mia," she said, her tone mildly surprised, as if I had simply dropped by for a chat. "We weren't expecting you." I set the flash drive wrapped in the velvet cloth on the kitchen counter, the tiny daisies catching the overhead light. She glanced down, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I came to make something clear," I said, my voice low, steady. "You took something from me, something you had no right to take." Her lips parted, a flicker of confusion crossing her face, but I didn't give her a chance to interrupt. "I want you to understand what you've done. You didn't just sell a piece of jewelry. You sold the last piece of my life with Adrian. You sold my memories, my promises, my future." I stepped back, the kitchen suddenly feeling too small, too suffocating. I took a deep breath, the cold, metallic taste of anger sharp on my tongue. "You'll hear from my lawyer soon," I said, my eyes never leaving hers. "I suggest you prepare yourself." Without waiting for her response, I turned on my heel, the sound of my boots echoing against the polished tile as I walked out the door, the winter wind biting at my cheeks as I stepped back into the cold. As I reached my car, I allowed myself a small, shaky exhale, my breath fogging the glass as I slid behind the wheel. I felt a strange, hollow calm settle in my chest, a quiet certainty that I was finally moving in the right direction. The fight had only just begun. The days leading up to my first meeting with my parents' lawyer felt surreal, like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, the wind whipping against my face, daring me to jump. I had received the official notice from Eva, a date and time set for the deposition, the first step in a long, likely, messy legal battle. I wasn't afraid, not anymore. On the morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully, pulling on a fitted navy blazer over a crisp white blouse. I slipped the velvet cloth into my purse, the tiny embroidered daisies, a quiet, stubborn reminder of my strength. I glanced at myself in the mirror, noting the hard set of my jaw, the sharpness in my eyes, and for the first time in months, I felt like I recognized the woman staring back at me. When I arrived at the law firm, the receptionist greeted me with a polite smile, her eyes flicking briefly to the neatly folded velvet cloth in my hand. "Ms. Collins," she said, her tone professional, her smile steady. "They're ready for you in the conference room." I nodded, slipping the cloth back into my bag and following her down a long, glass-walled hallway. My heels clicked against the polished floor, each step a small, satisfying echo that seemed to announce my presence. The conference room was all sleek lines and cold corporate efficiency, the walls lined with tall, dark shelves filled with thick, leather-bound volumes. My parents sat at one end of the long, polished table, their expressions a mix of discomfort and thinly veiled annoyance. My mother's hands twisted nervously in her lap, her eyes darting between me and the polished glass tabletop. My father sat beside her, his jaw set, his eyes narrowed, already bracing for a fight. Eva was already there, her tablet open, a sleek silver pen poised in her hand. She offered me a small nod as I took my seat, the leather chair cool and firm beneath me. The opposing lawyer, a balding man with small, sharp eyes and an overly tight tie, cleared his throat, shuffling his papers before finally speaking. "Ms. Collins, thank you for coming in today. We understand this situation is complicated, but we believe we can resolve this matter amicably." I forced a tight, controlled smile, my fingers lightly brushing the velvet cloth inside my bag. "There's nothing complicated about it," I said, my voice steady. "You took something that wasn't yours. You sold something that belonged to me, something that held far more than just monetary value." My mother shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flicking up to meet mine for the briefest of moments before sliding away, her cheeks flushing a faint, guilty pink. The lawyer glanced down at his notes, his expression tightening. "We acknowledge the emotional weight of this situation, but legally..." Eva cut him off, her tone cool, professional. "Legally, the ring was a personal gift clearly intended for Ms. Collins, as evidenced by the attached documentation. We have emails, receipts, and the original design notes confirming this. The ring's sale, without her consent, constitutes both financial and emotional theft." I watched as my parents' lawyer flinched slightly, the color draining from his face, as Eva slid a thick, neatly bound folder across the table. He hesitated, then flipped it open, his eyes skimming the neatly organized pages, his mouth tightening into a thin, bloodless line. My father leaned forward, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. "This is ridiculous. It's just a ring. You haven't even worn it in years." I turned to face him fully, my eyes locking onto his, my voice low, steady. "It wasn't just a ring. It was a promise, a piece of my past, a memory I wasn't ready to let go of. You had no right to take that from me." My mother's head snapped up, her eyes widening, a flicker of something like fear crossing her face. I reached into my bag, my fingers brushing the soft velvet cloth before pulling out the small flash drive I had wrapped inside it. I set it carefully on the polished tabletop, pushing it gently toward the lawyer. "This drive contains everything you need to understand exactly what you took from me. Every photo, every design email, every message Adrian and I shared while he planned that ring. You didn't just sell a piece of jewelry, you sold the last piece of him I had left." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension, the quiet hum of the overhead lights the only sound. My parents' lawyer hesitated, his eyes darting nervously between my parents and the small, unassuming drive resting on the table. My father opened his mouth to speak, his jaw tightening, but I cut him off, my voice sharp, unyielding. "You have until the end of the week to return what you owe me. If you don't, I will take this to court, and I promise you I won't hold back." Eva leaned back in her chair, her eyes glinting with quiet approval, her hands folded neatly over her tablet. The lawyer reached for the flash drive, his hand trembling slightly, his expression resigned. "We'll review this," he said, his voice thin, defeated. I stood, pushing my chair back slowly, the sound sharp and final in the otherwise silent room. I met my parents' eyes one last time, letting the weight of my words hang in the air between us, the quiet, unspoken promise of retribution settling over the table like a heavy fog. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, my steps steady, my shoulders back, the soft, comforting weight of the velvet cloth tucked securely into my bag. As I stepped out into the cool, late-afternoon air, the city buzzing around me, I felt a strange, fierce sense of freedom. I had taken the first step in reclaiming my story, my voice, my worth, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly, undeniably alive. Story 2. Hi there, I'm Odilon. According to my family, I failed. Too soft, too quiet, too unseen to ever be significant. At meals, they made jokes behind my back, called me jobless, even removed my name from the business I founded. I allowed them to do so for years. They believed they had them under control and dismissed them both until the day I entered the boardroom. Here's the bit they didn't anticipate, though. If your own father had called you a mistake while paying a paycheck that had your signature at the bottom, how would you have responded? Tell me where you're listening from tonight before we start. What's more, would you have said nothing as I did, or would you have said anything earlier? When I got out of my car and gazed up at the steakhouse's brilliant gold letters, it was almost 7:15. I hesitated a moment longer than I should have. Everything I already knew was shown to me by my reflection in the glass door. This is not what I was dressed for. I had crumpled my jacket on the passenger seat, causing it to wrinkle. My shoes didn't go with it. I entered even though I hadn't had time to clean the lint off my pants. I was shown through the restaurant by the hostess, who smiled courteously, a bit too courteously. She continued with a hint of something in her voice. "They're already seated." I feel sorry. Curiosity. For a family supper, the table was too long. Chairs with high backs and dark wood. Pearl's father was wearing a golf jacket, and everyone else was their mother. My sister Isolde, wearing her typical soft pink cashmere, is encircled by her circle of admirers, while my elder brother Nathan is looking at his phone. I received a couple short nods and stares. No one got up to welcome me. I took the seat. Just past the swinging door that let out kitchen sounds, it was at the extreme end next to the restrooms. Each time a waiter passed by. Without saying anything, I slid into it. And then I saw the napkins. Everybody had an ancient name stitched in gold thread on a linen napkin that was neatly folded into a triangle. It appeared to have been steam-cooked. Gregory, even my dad, stated. But mine. There was only one paper towel sheet. Not even a paper napkin proper. It was only a cheap square that had been pulled off, folded in half, and placed next to the dish. I gave it too much attention. Nobody spoke. Not even a joke. Nothing but quiet. The crueler aspect was that. I left it there with a smile. The waiter stopped by to collect orders for drinks. I requested lemon-flavored water. Nathan laughed and stated he was still sober. "Well done, sis. It hurt more than it ought to have." The topic of careers came up. It did, of course, always. Isolde glowed. "My company is completing a purchase." As she raised her wine glass, she spoke. 50 million assets, both international and domestic. Next week, they're putting their faith in me to conduct the client presentation. They all cheered as if they were in church. Dad grinned and remarked, "That's our girl." Some of us leave behind a legacy. Then he came over to me, and a few of us. Try it then. The words weren't the only thing. The delay before trying was the reason, as if he had deliberately avoided gentler wording after considering it. I didn't answer. I tucked the paper towel away carefully after folding it again. Isolde leaned in my direction. "At least you have a lot of spare time. Honestly, that must be pleasant. The grind isn't for everyone." More giggling, courteous, managed. Mom even grinned, but she swiftly steered away. "In any case, Nathan, how is the deck remodeling in your backyard going?" I sipped the water and let the chill to linger on my tongue. They believed I was unemployed. For months, they had held this belief. I quit my last job on my own terms and in silence. I didn't correct what they thought. I gave credence to their whispers. She is adrift. She could be unemployed. She never had Isolde's level of determination. Give them time to reflect, because the floor they were standing on was what I was constructing. I surveyed the table. Cherry wood. All right, china. A bottle of wine that was more expensive than my first post-college income. They didn't even aware they were dining at one of my establishments, and the air smelled like hubris and truffle butter. After putting the leather billfold next to my father, the server came back with the check. Isolde grabbed it. No, I understand. Dad, don't worry. When Odilon is well again, she will be able to treat us." Everyone chuckled once again. Brief and well-managed, like a laugh track from a comedy. I glanced at the waiter. "No need," I answered. It's already covered. Is it older? Blinked. Purchased. I gave a nod. Household account. Dad scowled. Home account. What are you saying? I carefully placed the crumpled paper towel back down after picking it up and holding it between two fingers. I looked them in the eyes one by one. You're sitting in a house. I nodded to the server as I walked by him after gently pressing the napkin down. I didn't wait for their responses to calm down or for another remark. Before anybody had the courage to pose a serious inquiry, I left. The chilly night air felt good on my skin. With my keys in hand, I crossed the street to my car and tightened my coat. Headlights racing by, glasses clinking, and laughter from nearby tables filled the streets of downtown Atlanta. As I got into the driver's seat and shut the door, I let the stillness fall between me and each of them like a curtain. I did not switch on the radio. I made no phone calls. I simply allowed the city to pass by my windows. Still recalling the feel of the embroidered napkin, my fingers were resting on the driving wheel. The irony-dipped, silky feel of it on my fingertips. Just beyond the industrial sector, where the gleam of downtown gave way to fading lettering and drab concrete, I was stopped by a red light. It was still standing when I turned my gaze to the left. The storage facility. Not much had changed. The siding's paint flaking was worse than it had been. The bones were the same as they were 15 years before, but the windows had been updated. I had bet everything on those same bones. I stopped. At this hour, the parking lot was deserted, the humming sort of silence. I let my thoughts drift while I sat in the car with the motor running. In the past, that building had been everything. I used what little money I had saved from tutoring and part-time jobs to sign the lease when I was 23. The room was empty with only a leaky roof and old cement floors. It was mine, though. I used it as a launching pad. Though I knew no one would take me seriously, I had this idea for logistics automation software that could track, optimize, and anticipate delays before they occurred. Not at that age, not with my name. I therefore made up a fictitious consulting business and pitched under that name. Everything was created from the ground up. Covered all night. I learned how to manage servers on my own, worked double shifts, and sent emails to businesses. One Sunday meal. I told my family about it at the time. It seems like yesterday when I recall this old reaction. She smirked. Fork paused midair and said, "What is this like nerd fiction? Sounds like something out of a B-list sci-fi movie." Dad didn't even look up from his glass. "You need to think about a real career, honey. Something steady. HR would be a great fit for you. You're organized." They didn't ask questions, just moved on. I laughed along with them that night, but when I got back to the warehouse, I cried for 20 minutes on the concrete floor, then kept writing code. Months later, I landed my first real contract with a major freight company out of the Carolinas. They didn't care who I was. They appreciated outcomes. The system worked. But when I shared a sanitized version of the data out of naive pride, Isolde took it, dressed it up, rebranded it. She presented it to her company like it was her brainstorm. I didn't find out until Thanksgiving. I stepped into the living room and saw my dad toasting her in front of the family. To his older, he said for saving the project at her firm. "She's got a mind like a general. No mention of me, no footnote, no wink, just erased." I stood there holding a pie I'd spent 4 hours cooking and felt my cheeks flush. Mom clapped. Nathan high-fived her. I sat in the corner and stayed silent. That was the moment things shifted. Not only that I was invisible, but that they were rewriting the tale and leaving me out. I didn't correct them. I didn't pick out the emails, the images, the code with my digital signature. I filed everything softly, permanently. I told myself that if I ever got to tell the tale again, it would be on my terms and with receipts. My gaze returned back to the warehouse in front of me. It was no longer a shell. It now housed a shipping startup, one of several under my holding firm. I didn't use my name on most items. I discovered early on that it was preferable to be underestimated. However, I was the one who signed that lease. I owned the structure they disregarded. Additionally, the systems I had created in that very warehouse were used to process every payment my father and sister received. They didn't know. Every office they worked at had a lease signed by the unemployed female they highlighted. I did not look back as I walked out of the parking lot. Like it didn't matter to anyone but me, the warehouse vanished into the mirror. It was a calm journey home. All I could hear were tires cutting the tarmac, and my mind replaying how Isolde had regarded me when I mentioned house account. In front of a sober audience, she appeared to be a magician whose act had just gone wrong. I was more at ease than I had anticipated. I didn't bother unpacking my purse when I arrived home. I drank a glass of water, kicked off my heels, and waited for the quiet to subside. There was no laughing reverberating through my condo's walls. However, at least they didn't resound with condemnation either. I went to bed after leaving my phone charging on the kitchen counter. I woke up to the sound of buzzing around 6:38 a.m. Ping, ping, ping. Before I touched it, the screen sprang to life. In the family group chat, there are 27 unread messages. I kept my thumb over it. I was aware of what I would discover. Before opening that stomach tug is familiar. Something you couldn't ignore but didn't ask for. I gave Isolde a tap. Was that a scream for assistance or a flex, Dad? She has always been dramatic. She was unable to maintain a legitimate work because of this. Don't be hard on me, Mom. She had good intentions. I believe Isolde is experiencing another breakdown. The final word was a smack in the face. Disintegrate. When I stopped going to Sunday brunch after working 80-hour weeks and missed a wedding because I was flying back from Seattle with a signed merger deal in my briefcase, they gave me that moniker years ago. I didn't even blink my eyes. I just saved screenshots by pressing down on the conversation thread. No answer, no defense, nothing but quiet. It's out of strategy, not weakness. My phone then buzzed once more. Separate conversation. Liam, my nephew. Liam? Antonio? Hello. This morning I noticed the group chat. It's incorrect in my opinion. I simply wanted to let you know that I support you. I stopped. It wasn't pain that made my chest clench. Something softer. Relief, perhaps. There was another message. Liam, too. I spotted this and felt you should include a snapshot even though Dad stated you wouldn't see it. A confidential side conversation. Sold to her spouse. Do not be concerned. When Dad retires, I'll take over as vice president. No, HR or Audilon is taken seriously by the board. She is simply the reserved person that attends galas. I read it twice, then carefully again. The silent one. They came to that conclusion. I wasn't the strategist or the founder. Just someone who chose neutral nail polish and posed well in family portraits. I responded to Liam's SMS. You made the correct decision. Thank you. No hearts, no emojis. Just the facts. I then selected Leave Conversation after scrolling to the bottom of the family group chat options. It made no request for an explanation. I didn't either. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and poured myself another glass of water. I didn't even have to consider it. Emery has 2 assistants. Board consolidation is the subject. The senior personnel list for Phase 1 is attached. Every name was read twice by me. Isolde Aldridge, Senior Director of Logistics, Franklin Aldrich. Herman Aldridge, Vice President of External Partnerships, serves as Interim President. There was a commonality among all 3. They continued to believe that the boardrooms they entered belonged to them. Correct. They were unaware that I had provided funding for the last round of bridge finance. They were unaware that I was the holding firm to which they reported. Furthermore, they had no idea that their key cards would stop functioning by next Tuesday. Tuesday was not the day I waited. I was at my work by Sunday evening. Outside my window, the city was calm and dark, similar to the quiet that precedes a required storm. I launched a private browser window, reclined back, and drew my laptop closer. Nobody was able to track it down. The access link to Reynolds Human Capital, a consulting business renowned for its corporate culture rehabilitation, was typed by my fingertips. Reynolds was what most people were unaware of. bought discreetly years ago through one of my portfolio's lesser-known subsidiaries. Executive division of the subject. Review of culture. Instant access to Julia Reynolds' body. Start a thorough audit of every employee under Franklin and Isolde Aldridge. Within 24 hours, anonymous complaint gathering will start. Every discovery should be sent to the board compliance folder labeled Phase 1. No flags, no signatures. Let the data do the talking. Internal grievances started to pour into the inbox by Monday afternoon. Some had just a few lines, others resembled journal entries, after being ignored for years. "We're fortunate to have a family-run business," he says, "but we're not family. We are expendable." In front of the interns, she referred to me as Grandma in Heels. You don't get promoted if you're not related to them. Isolde once made a joke at a Christmas gathering. Unbeknownst to them, some people age out of relevance. There I stood. It was my 50th birthday. I read them all, not once, 3 times. An ancient scar was scraped by each line. I believed it to be healed. Inside, they established a little kingdom, something that I made to be flat equitable and useful. And that kingship would fall today, smug brick after smug brick. I was enjoying my second cup of coffee on Tuesday morning when the internal notice sounded. There will be a mandatory compliance review meeting. Time of Isolde Aldridge, 11:30 a.m. Officer Amanda Roth, Senior Consultant, Reynolds HC, assigned to Conference Room 3C. I didn't grin. I didn't have to. Isolde's heels reverberated down the marble corridor by 11:15. She entered my office with her chin up and her lips tight, and I looked through the opaque glass. After 5 minutes, my dad stormed into my office without knocking. "What is this?" He spoke loudly. "Isolde was just caught in an ambush. Why in the world are you doing this?" Dylan. Slowly, I put down my coffee. The rim's steam was still rising. The board took the initiative. "You are aware that transparency is a hot topic right now." He gave me a scowl as if I had smacked him. "Do you find this amusing? Do you honestly believe that the best way to prove yourself is to scrutinize your own sister calmly?" I folded my hands on the desk. "Although I believe it's past due, you are welcome to submit a formal protest. The procedure currently operates in this manner, not tantrums in the hallway." He appeared to want to toss something, but nothing within his grasp would save him from seeming foolish. The shaking in the frame stuck with me even though he didn't smash the door when he rushed away. My legal aide, Emery, who was one of the few individuals in the organization who truly understood who I was behind the scenes, received a last command from me that afternoon. The folder should be left on the VPI conference table. No justification. Put a label on it. Preliminary results. Ethical issues. Verify that it's the red tabbed variety. Just presence, no autographs, no opinion. Before the folder was even opened that evening, the rumors began to circulate, and I was aware of the purpose, if they believed this to be private. Hold off until the board discovers what they have been concealing. The night before the anniversary event, I didn't get much sleep. I was already dressed when the daylight began to peek through my condo's wooden flooring. Dark pants and a navy silk blouse. Hair in a tidy bun. Not a sound. Nothing that demanded notice. Just subtle presence and crisp lines. The same manner that I constructed everything. They wouldn't look. It seemed like a long elevator journey up to the rooftop garden. As usual, above the faint notes of light jazz music, I could hear conversation. No one turned, but my heels clicked on the tiled walkway to the reception. Not a single head turned to look at me. Perhaps it was simpler that way. White seats were arranged in rows facing a stage with gold and navy curtain screens on either side that looped a slideshow highlighting the company's history. I crossed my legs and gently let my eyes to roam the screen after finding an empty seat at the rear that was neither too distant nor too close. There were my designs. I created the UI when I was 23. When I still thought they would be proud, I covered the mock-up in that dusty warehouse. However, beneath the pictures is strong white lettering that highlights Franklin and Isolde Aldridge's strategic objective. Not even blinking. The montage came to an end. The CEO stepped onto the platform. A few board members came next. Cheers. Appropriate giggles at outdated office pictures. My father then came forward for the microphone exchange. His face hadn't changed much, but his voice had become even more assured, as if decades of praise had shaped it more deeply. "I want to express my gratitude to everyone who has contributed to this legacy," he remarked. "A family doesn't get to create anything enduring very often." For emphasis, he paused and grinned down at the staff rows. "Isolde, my daughter, deserves special recognition for her leadership vision and strategic acumen throughout the company's formative years." Again, polite applause. Isolde grinned as modestly as she could. Then he looked at my younger daughter Odilon, then toward the rear where I was sitting. "I'm aware that you're still figuring things out. Continue." He laughed softly, as if it were a supportive giggle. A quiet sound was emitted by someone close to me. Another person chuckled, not in a nasty way, like if they felt sorry for me. I got up. I didn't stutter or hurry. I continued down the side aisle until the atmosphere changed, until I was far behind the applauding and the music. I finally let out a breath after pushing open the hefty double doors and entering the lower patio. Continue. Not too far from the party, but close enough to be alone, I sat in my suit on the sidewalk. The echoes of their joy were too loud for me to hear. That sentence. It wasn't only a rejection. It summed up all of my contacts with them over the previous 20 years. "Are you still looking for a place?" as though I had been exploring rather than constructing. I gazed at the fountain in the courtyard's middle. As the early twilight dimmed, the water trickled softly over the string lights. I considered packing a suitcase, heading home, and vanishing. I could. I had the money, the obscurity, and the silence. However, a young intern named Kayla was interrupted by a voice close to the stone archway where two corridors converged. I recalled that a middle-aged executive was reprimanding her. "You don't just knock on a VPI door in the middle of a logistics discussion," he said. "A chain of command exists. You are no longer a college student." She nodded, despite her cheeks crumpling. Last month, it was her who inquired about vendor integrations. Luminous eyes, quick learner. With an armor-like embrace around a file folder, she turned and left. I saw her leave. I recognized the stroll I used to take when I had ideas and no one was interested. I remember being made fun of for asking pointless questions in rooms I wasn't supposed to be in, back when I believed they may be correct. I tightened my hands as I glanced at the lights once again. I would allow them to steal my name, my space, and my credit. I would allow them to enclose me and pretend that I was still learning. However, it is no longer the case. Not after tonight. Slowly, I dusted the dust from my trousers, got up, and walked back toward the corridor that went inside. Perhaps it was time for them to hear my voice if they were brave enough to remain silent. Perhaps it was time for them to hear my voice if they were brave enough to remain silent. Monday morning came with a false sense of peace. The city was buzzing with its typical unconsciousness, and the sky over Midtown wore a faint stretch of gray. I parked at the executive garage's 4th floor. As usual, same key fob, same space. However, I wasn't simply turning up today. I adjusted my blazer, tapped the Bluetooth in my ear, and got out of the car. I walked silently toward the service elevator and murmured, "Start phase 2. Without hesitation, my assistant said, "Yes, Miss Aldridge." The system initiated what we referred to as a quiet lockdown as the elevator doors shut behind me. Only back-end selective access changes, no system-wide notices or warning banners. The cleanliness was surgical. The IT security team had already started putting the policy into practice when I arrived at my workplace. I saw the courtyard down below where staff were just beginning to arrive from my window. They were all unaware that by lunchtime, some doors will be closed to some individuals. I went to the admin area and logged in. Zelda Aldridge and Franklin Aldridge are at the top of the list, having both had their executive security override removed. I didn't grin. Retaliation wasn't the point here. Control was at issue here. Getting back something I shouldn't have lost in the first place. A notice showed up on my screen at 9:02 a.m. No access. An attempt to connect into the Aldridge Air server was rejected. Then another access was refused. The request to enter the F. Aldridge Financial Archives was denied. I turned to face my helper, who was holding a tablet at the edge of the doorway. Ensure that their responses are recorded. After giving one nod, she walked out of the room. A ripple had already begun to form by late morning. Demanding to know why her credentials weren't functioning, Isolde had barged into HR. I was not required to be present. I had surveillance footage logs and a timestamp. I let the statistics do the talking. However, revenge arrived by lunchtime. A flagged message from Internal Affairs buzzed across my phone. A potential attempt at character defamation is urgent. An anonymous, unsigned PDF that said I had falsified performance reports due to emotional instability is attached. It was tinged with worry, the type that conceals its claws with phrases like unfit and erratic. I learned everything from the file information. It had been made the previous evening on a machine that belonged to his former helper. Before she used that laptop to create her quarterly reports, I had seen its IP address. Careless. I stood up and closed the file. There was no need for a meeting. All I needed was a hallway. At first, she didn't notice me coming. With her face taut with fake serenity and her chin high, she clicked her heels quickly along the hallway. She stopped for just a moment when she saw me. I even remarked, "If you're going to leak fake documents, better encryption at least." She narrowed her eyes after blinking. "You're simply resentful. You weren't picked by Dad." "Did he pick you?" I inquired. "When I was constructing everything you stood on, did you simply talk louder?" Isolde's head cocked. "Odie, he never thought of you as a leader. He didn't even consider you a rival." I moved in closer. "He never saw," I said. For a period. I didn't wait to hear her counter-argument. Before the pain of what I had spoken had really subsided, I turned to go. I went back to my office and composed a last message to legal, to the Ethics Committee and HR findings of subject wrongdoing. A complete board review is necessary. Isolde wasn't imitated by me. I didn't take after my dad. I just hit the transmit button. After that, I wrote a note in my planner. 10 a.m. on Thursday. Conference room 9B full board. The gathering wouldn't be visible to them. Send out invitations before it's too late. The boardroom door had already latched behind them before they learned the meeting was mandatory. The door clicked behind them as soon as they had entered the meeting room. There was no loud noise, only a neat mechanical lock that made it obvious it wouldn't be opening again very soon. The board was to my left. Legal counsel was opposite from me, and I was already seated at the head of the long walnut table. Nobody spoke. The quiet was effective. My dad scowled. "What is this?" Isolde looked around the room and her heels halted, eyes flitting between the faces. One more check for conformity. Faking a half grin as if it may yet win someone over, she questioned. Calmly, I gestured to the frosted glass behind them. "For secrecy, the doors are shut. You should sit down." After hesitating, they sat down. Very much. Like warnings, the chairs scraped. I leaned a little forward. Even a voice. "Let's get started." I handed the board secretary a pile of documents. The members grabbed for theirs, opening the covers one by one. Shell company diagrams, transfer memoranda, and incorporation documents. Then came the actual surprise. My name. Majority stakeholder. The place fell silent like a chill breeze. My dad's mouth tightened. "This is absurd." "Is it?" I tilted my head in question. "Because the Delaware office of the Secretary of State appears to disagree. Your signature does too." "That's right," I gestured. "Transferring Class B shares to a company that I just so happened to own." His hands trembled only a little as he turned the pages more quickly. Isolde was still standing. She ran her fingertips over the edge of the folder as if it were about to bite. He said again, more to himself than to anybody else. "This is a trick." "No," I answered in a firm voice. "This is the past. I just wasn't in yours." The air was heavy. You could still hear paper being shuffled and breathing. Nothing else until I pushed a tiny black remote control that I had retrieved from my blazer's side pocket. I said, "Let's analyze culture." Voices came first, followed by the crackling of a ceiling speaker. "Isolde, clearly, half of the teams are coasting. You don't have a voice if you're not family. Next." Laughter. The women left the room as her father spoke. "On the back and forth, you save time." One of the board members tensed. Another blinked quickly as he glanced down at the table. I gave it 10 more seconds to play. I then selected pause. 3 months ago, those were taken, complete with your quarterly off-site refreshments. Someone cleared their throat. "I think the board has given too much praise to the wrong individuals. Let's examine more closely at what you've been clapping for," I replied. Another shuffle. At the far end, the legal advisor took out a memo from his own folder. According to him, these and other remarks gathered throughout our research seemed to be in violation of the company's ethical code. Clause 14 requires a required contract review where the violations are combined with share manipulation and the concealment of legitimate credit. He made a sale. He was pallid now. My father stopped talking and leaned back. The loudest sound in the room could have been that. The chairman's hands were folded. Slowly he murmured, "Mr. Aldridge, Miss Aldridge, we need your resignations by today's end of business." My father sold after opening his lips and closing it again. His voice broke. "This is not possible." I fixed my blazer and stood up. "Did you wish to remove me?" I looked at each of them and replied, "To preserve your sense of power. The exact thing you attempted to keep me out of will now be removed from your memory." After that, I turned, went to the door, and gave a nod. The lock behind me snapped open as soon as I reached the assistant who was waiting outside. I revised the conclusion since they had excluded me from the company's history. My clothing were still stuck to the boardroom air. I didn't sit down or let out a breath until I returned to my workplace. As if it owed me something, I went directly to the window, drew aside the blinds, and gazed out at the metropolitan skyline. "Only this release," I said, turning around and tapping my assistant's phone. The assertion. The press release was all over the place 20 minutes later. The headlines are thunderous. Following an internal ethics shakeup, the company will undergo significant transformation. The new administration says nepotism and bigotry are not tolerated. For the first time, my name appeared on it without any concealment. Aldridge Autoline. Hundreds and hundreds of texts and emails flooded in. Current supervisors, retired staff members, former interns, and particularly women contacted out. Some people expressed gratitude in entire paragraphs. Others just sent a simple thank you message. It was long overdue, humiliating, and overpowering. I came about it when perusing the online mentions. An old coworker from the early days that I hardly remembered shared a side-by-side picture. One picture was outdated, faded. Wearing jeans and t-shirts, our original founding team was standing in the warehouse, all of us smiling. Near the rear, I was partially hidden by a folding table. The cropped image from the same day is the other picture. However, I'm in the middle of the foreground this time. She constructed it according to the caption. They simply stood before it. It struck more forcefully than I had anticipated. Within hours, the post went viral. Desperation accompanied that virality. That night, while sitting side by side on a beige sofa and attempting to appear unguarded, Isolde and my father went live on social media. She had flawless makeup. He spoke in a theatrical tone. With an almost tremulous voice, Isolde said, "She's been planning this for years." Justice was not at issue here. This was retaliation. My father, who was always understanding, followed up with Odell. She found it difficult to accept criticism. Although we adore her, she has been manipulating this story to harm the business. Together, we constructed. I didn't recoil. Others posted a retort, but I didn't. Anonymous leaks of screenshots from internal correspondence surfaced. Whistleblowers emerged from the shadows. Stories of arbitrary demotions, rude remarks, and exclusion from important meetings were recounted by former employees. Trends became apparent. Within 1 hour, their videos' comments turned against them. One lady stated I was fired after telling HR that Isolde made fun of my stammer. She must have been deliberate about that as well. Another person wrote that her father advised her not to dress too ambitiously. This is instantaneous karma. Silently, I watched it all happen. I then made a little video. I took a seat at my desk. No makeup, no lighting team. The lens and I alone. I responded, I believe in truth, but I don't believe in takedowns. Silence is a weak foundation for success. I kept quiet long enough. I left off the hashtags. No editing, no music. It was not just a trending clip, it struck a chord. After declining earlier that week, our company's stock steadied before rising. Integrity was valued by investors more than denial. And in the middle of everything, unexpectedly, something occurred. My home address received a delivery. A vintage cardboard box that had been meticulously packed and labeled in my mother's handwriting I hadn't seen in more than 10 years. A sealed package, a charm bracelet, and a few family photographs are inside. I could still read the little faded and occasionally blurred note within. Do not allow them to minimize you in order to suit their universe. You were destined to construct your own. I held that paper in both hands while I sat there for a long time. Her voice reverberated across the ages. I put the message next to a freshly framed picture on my office bookcase later that evening. The warehouse one. The version without cropping. But I was in the spotlight this time. I did more than simply modify the conclusion. This rendition was above their wildest expectations. It had been 3 months. The workplace was quieter now, yet it seemed more lively in some way. Free-flowing conversations took place. Hurried whispers in elevators are over. No more looking over people's shoulders. Just the cadence of individuals working fearlessly and efficiently. There were no double takes as I moved around the main level as I had hundreds of times before. Nobody is attempting to position me. No erroneous presumptions. They were now aware that the cloak was gone. No background pseudonym or borrowed title. I didn't hide behind the majority stakeholder or the project creator. I just strolled, and both they and I saw each other. A man in accounting smiled and nodded as he went by me. A facilities management woman waved a clipboard in the shape of a trophy. Even the intern I once helped get through her first briefing on logistics. She raised her head. Later that week, I sat in one of the breakout rooms with the intern. She hesitated, tinkering with the corner of her notepad and tapping her pen. I considered leaving, she eventually acknowledged. I didn't believe that people like us belonged here after everything that had transpired. I saw her not as a supervisor or even a mentor, but as someone who understood what it was like to doubt your own position in a space that had been constructed by others. I understand how you feel. But don't let them teach you to disappear, I added quietly. She didn't weep, but she blinked rapidly, simply grinned and nodded. It was the type of modest success that I used to believe was inconsequential. As it happens, they are the most important, as the days went by. As my father and I grew older, the ambient sounds turned to static. Neither had gone back to work. The consulting legacy of my father vanished into obscurity. Isolde attempted to open her own shop, but within weeks, her reputation preceded her, and prospective customers began to leave. I'm sure they still held me responsible, but now they did so from a distance in dimly lit rooms that weren't theirs. One evening at home, with my mother's words still carefully folded next to my desk, I went back to that letter. I did more than simply read it this time. I put it in a frame. I placed it next to a brand new plaque that said CEO Odilon Maris directly above my computer display. Initials in email footers are no longer acceptable. No more editing speeches by others. There will be no more chairs at table corners. I contributed to creating my voice, my position, and my name. Those mornings were peaceful and calm. Now I would get to my workplace early, get a cup of fresh coffee, and walk into the foyer where it all began. I had waited for an interview in the same lobby years prior, clutching a CV and wearing borrowed heels. While a receptionist looked straight through me, no one would ask for it. There was now a quote, not a catchphrase or mission statement, etched into the glass behind the same registration desk. Just the plain facts. Not everyone raises their voice. We construct spaces so that everyone else can at last. When visitors read that they stopped. While the new recruits took pictures, I would walk by. Just being there with no announcements or cheers. That was sufficient. I revised the conclusion since they had excluded me from the company's history. In addition, my family attempted to shrink me in order to fit me into their frame, but I wasn't made to fit. I was made to construct new ones.